Hey guys, today we're going to talk about semaglutide and muscle loss. Certainly this is something that's come up recently around semaglutide. I think one of the reasons is a recent segment on CNN where Dr. Peter Attia, well respected in anti-aging medicine and guy definitely knows his stuff, was on CNN and was discussing weight loss with semaglutide and something he had noticed in his patients around muscle loss. I've had a few patients ask me about that, so that's what we're going to talk about today. So we'll just look at the research around muscle loss and semaglutide. There's not a whole bunch of studies. Actually, there was a pilot study that came out last year, 2022, from Japan. They were looking at 13, I wouldn't say elderly, but that's what they said. The median age was 52. So in any event, these people were on semaglutide for 3 months versus being on a placebo. At the end of 3 months, they did another set of measurements. So they were looking at weight, they were looking at fat mass loss, they were looking at muscle mass, and they were also looking at percent muscle mass. And so of those things, definitely people lost weight. So they had the weight loss, they had a decrease in fat mass. They also had a decrease in muscle mass. That was across the board. Now, when they compared looking at percent muscle mass, which is what is the percent of muscle of the weight, that was unchanged at 3 months. And so the study was specifically looking at body composition, fat, and muscle percentages. There's another study, again, this is from Japan, where they basically did what's called a meta-analysis, where they look at a bunch of different trials that are similar and they put the data together to make it stronger. So what they did, they ended up including 18 trials that looked at not body fat percent, but what they would call fat-free mass. So essentially what that equates to is everything outside of fat. So that would include water, that would include muscle, that would include bone. And so in that study, yes, they did note that there was a decrease in free fat mass. Really what this confirms is something that we've known for a while, in that when people lose weight, they lose fat, but they also lose muscle. And this is irrespective of how they did it. So if they did diet and exercise, they lost muscle. If you did it with the medication, you often lost muscle as well. And if you did it with surgery, gastric bypass, you still lost muscle. In the step 1 trial, which is the initial trial that got semaglutide approved by the FDA, they did go back and look at some numbers. So, and looking at the people who were on semaglutide versus not, the people who were on semaglutide, they lost 10.4% fat. The people that were not lost 1.2%. The people who are on semaglutide lost 6.9% muscle, and the people who were not on semaglutide lost 1.5. So even the people who are just on diet or exercise, they had muscle loss as well. In fact, they had more muscle loss in a percentage basis compared to fat loss. Another thing they looked at, which is probably just as important, but certainly it helps to understand if they were being harmed, meaning they were losing more muscle than fat, is looking at the ratio of muscle to fat. So at the beginning of the trial, people's average ratio was 1.34 to 1. So 1.34 muscle compared to 1 fat. At the end of the trial, the average ratio was 1.55 to 1, meaning the ratio had went up, meaning they had more muscle compared to fat. To summarize that, the body composition was improved with the people who are on semaglutide compared to not. So now, given this is a common problem for people who are looking to lose weight, what can we do to preserve it? What can we do about it? So there is one interesting thing also, is that people who are obese actually tend to have more muscle mass versus a normal weight individual. So we do have a bit of a buffer, but there are some things we can do to help preserve the muscle. And so one of those things is exercise. So resistance training is going to have the most impact on that. Some studies have shown that we can cut that muscle loss in half with a resistance training or weight training. It doesn't have to be a ton. It could be 3 times a week. So the types of resistance training can include benching, or even just push-ups, squats. Again, this can be with weight or without weight, even though we call it weight training. But the idea is we're moving large muscle groups, deadlifts, pull-ups. These are things that can have the greatest impact in keeping the muscle on. And this has been studied for people who are trying to lose weight. Now, interestingly, cardio actually had an impact, not just weight training, but also doing running, walking, intense interval training. So these things can also help maintain muscle mass, even though intuitively you may not think that cardio has anything to do with building muscle. In most of the pathways, that is true, but in studies, it has been shown to help prevent muscle loss. With the caveat, as long as we're not overdoing it. The other thing you can do besides exercise is making sure that you have adequate protein intake. So the goal protein intake would be about 0.4 grams per kilogram. So if you are, let's say, 220 pounds, that's about 100 kilos, which would be 80 grams of protein. So if I'm a 220 pound individual, I would want to have at least 80 grams of protein per day to help maintain that. And that is per day. For most individuals, the timing is not going to be as important. It's going to be the total amount of protein. So you don't have to feel like you got to eat every 3 hours. It is more important that we get the total amount. Now, if you're an athlete or in some type of competition, that's a different story. But for non-elite trained people, the total amount is going to be the most important thing. And generally, I would aim to be somewhere between 20 to 40 grams of protein per meal, though, you know, one of those can be a snack as well. If you want to learn more about weight loss, check out one of these videos. We'll see you next time.